Well, here we are again. It's always such a pleasure. I'm not going to do the full song, don't worry about that. Welcome to, for the first time, part one of one of my art montages. Now you see, this piece had so much footage to it that my software outright refused to set it all up in one video. So we're doing two. It's going to be one this weekend and one next week. Now, what could have possibly required such a thing? Well, you're already starting to see it take shape on the screen, as it were. As this was a 16-character art piece that had a couple of technical issues as I was going on. It was done over about a month and 48 cumulative hours of work, so no surprise that it took a bit to cut down. And is by far my most ambitious piece to date. It, in theory, takes place in the setting of Arturium, the world that I've made for myself, where all of my D&D and Pathfinder fantasy TTRPG related adventures typically take place. It concerns, for the large part, a group of goblins known as, and this is going to immediately make sense, the Hefters. We have Jaliah, a goblin from the Arctic, a Bloodrager. There is Tammie-Lynn, a desert goblin, their rogue thief and a bit of a swashbuckler, one might say. There is Mara from the northern rainforest, a witch serving a mysterious master, accompanied by her elemental familiar Elith, who is much more of an airhead. There is Monika, another rainforest goblin, but with peach-coloured skin, as when she was plucked, she retained certain qualities. I'll explain later. The final member is Seluri, another Arctic goblin, same as Jaliah, but this one a summoner, for when she was exploring and adventuring with the party, having served as their face, their diplomat for some time, they were caught in a tomb, a vault they were attempting to open up. And in an attempt to escape the various opponents, the guardians of this tomb, she dived into a coffin. One inhabiting the still lingering spirit of Setepenre, the dancer of the first dynasty. Or at least the oldest dynasty, as she called it. So they merged together. And now, as Seluri still performs her role as the face and the negotiator of the party, Setepenre is her strength, and in many ways her tutor. As they work together, Setepenre teaches her, along with being a source of comfort for the lot of them. This piece not only features them, but they are the ones around whom the earliest parts of it were based. When I started this work, it was originally intended to just be them. Oh, and of course, I mustn't forget Snake, Monika's giant snake. Yes, that is its given name. God, and there goes my train of thought for a moment there, thinking about the giant snake. So yes, this piece originally started just as the Hefters, just as this adventuring party, and as still an ambitious piece, but I realised we have a lot of very short, very wide goblins. And it occurred to me that I wanted to put a little bit more into demonstrating how they fit into everything. So I ended up adding someone, Neri, you can see her appearing at the center of the piece. I guess the best word to say would be merfolk, the one that people would understand. The love interest of Mara. They're both quiet and studious types, and she was very much in need of the comfort and reassurance. I wanted her to show how it looks to be around these characters compared to just being a regular person. And she was doing that very well. But Neri is a witch. She comes with her familiar Squalos, a coral octopus. So I had to include him as well. It made sense to, complete the character. But then I started thinking further, because they weren't the only romantic interests involved. There were other attached characters, and this is how the piece spiraled out of control. I decided that I should include Neri's other partners, um, who were incidentally somewhat connected to Mara, that being Miriam and Gloss. Miriam's a kobold, working in Albion as a private detective, and Gloss is her companion, her shade drawn from the worlds below, who is eager to experience emotion, and so much less restrained with her actions and mannerisms, and by far the softest of the piece, at least as you see them here. But that still kind of put it only partly complete, because that's those two, but there was one final proper romantic interest involved here, Marribel. Marribel has only recently come to appreciate Jaliah. Oh, no, that's a lie. She appreciated her for some time, but only recently did she admit those feelings. And so she joined, appearing on the left side of this piece, talking to her interest. But she comes with a most unusual circumstance. She herself is a Draconic sorceress, and her powers have manifested in an unusual way, resulting in the development of not one, not two, but three current familiars, the Beryls, three fairy dragons, which thus necessitated also adding them. So between the 5 goblins, the 1 elemental, the 1 giant snake, the 1 thick snake, the Draconic sorceress, her 3 draconic familiars, the Merfolk, the Kobold and her shade, and an octopus, suddenly the number of characters in the scene had doubled. And obviously, that's a big deal. But the only thought I had was that it kind of needed to be done. They needed to be all there or none at all. And I didn't want to leave the Hefters without someone to properly show how they match up to the regular individual. So, if Neri was going to be there, so were the rest of them. And that is how a 16-character piece came out. I don't plan to do another piece like this for some time, but I can't deny it was fun. There was definite enjoyment here in completing something, working on something so ambitious with so many poses, so many shapes, many of them similar but often subtly different. You can already see it here. There is loosely the same shape for most of the characters, but none of them are the same widths, none of them are the same proper dimensions. Mara takes it as the overall biggest, but Tammie-Lynn is more top heavy. Gloss is there's so much to Gloss. You kind of lose sight of parts of her from the front and the back to other parts from that area. And poses, proportions at various angles, that is difficult from an artistic standpoint, and I'm still very much learning. My preferred position is this front-on look. You can see it with my persona, the model that I use. It's much easier to get symmetrical, clean, fully understood proportions when the character you are drawing is directly on from you. You can do height much easier because it's easy to draw objects around them. And when I got onto the terrain of this piece, that became very obvious. The scene of this, the terrain, the background is not very good. It's simple and it conveys what it needs to, but it does only a half-formed job of it. And it was never meant to be the point. The point was always the characters, their interactions, the little quirks that make them stand out both in their mannerisms, how they hold themselves, and their aesthetic, their features. Like here you can see we are putting the some details onto Setepenre. She was a dancer. She had a certain showy aesthetic to her. Hence, there is a lot of jewelry going on, but not much actual clothing. There are certain things she doesn't need to hide, whereas most humanoids do. So I decorated her in other ways instead. Things that were very visibly kind of stand out. They showed her off a lot more, but they still added character to how she must perceive herself, and she is very confident in her appearance. Well, she taught Seluri, now being added to, how to be confident, how to convey herself, because larger figures can have trouble sometimes. It can make things it can give people a certain perception of you. And Seluri is shorter than most. She's actually one of the shortest, 2'6". So she has a whole lot of width, not very much height, and had to learn as best she could uh, to use that for herself rather than let it be used. Here's a good example of the front-on view that makes this whole thing much easier. The whole design. I get to use the mirror tool. That saves me so much energy and effort when I can do that and then just make little tweaks at the end. Now, this also was another exercise for me in building these characters into places that actually interacted. I haven't really done many large character pieces before, and the ones I have done often don't have too much interaction between those characters. But having them leaning on things, offering things, like even sitting on each other, like with the Beryls on Miriam. And here, Neri is leaning on Mara. She has an arm round her, and that was a pose that, even just aside from rotation, meant there was a lot more for me to try and figure out. There is how the body stretches. There is, in this case, the peculiarities of the feet. I wanted to make something a little different to demonstrate more clearly that she is an aquatic being, since her appearance doesn't normally show that so well. But that is all I have time to talk about for now. So I'll perhaps flesh out a little more of their backstories and a few more interesting details next week when I get onto the finishing the sketch and doing the colouring and the shading. So until spring rises once more on another wonderful day.